Okay. So, like I said, it is a joy to be back. I see lots of familiar names and faces, and as always, some new names and faces as well. So, thank you for joining me as we explore the Montessori approach to fantasy, creativity, and imagination, and really discovering how the Montessori pedagogy and philosophy fosters those different things in children and also the distinction between them, because that's really important for child development and also specifically for the Montessori approach. Before we start to dive into all of that, I'd love to share just a few details about me. My name is Heather White. I'm a former Montessori classroom teacher, administrator, and in-home caregiver. And I was noticing I have with more than 15 years of experience. I think I'm coming up to 17 now. Currently, I work as an educational coach. I work in multiple roles with the Center for Guided Montessori Studies, including as their alumni conference and webinar coordinator, their accreditation associate, and as an instructional guide, supporting adult learners in many capacities who are working to receive their Montessori certification. I also develop blogs and content for several organizations, including the American Montessori Society and Guide and Grow. And I'm an adjunct professor at Sarasota University, which is the only MACD accredited institution of higher education dedicated solely to Montessori. So it's perfect for me because of my passion in that area. I'm also credentialed by the American Montessori Society at the 3 to 6 and 6 to 9 age levels and have experience working with children 0 to 3, 9 to 12, and at the adolescent age as well. I hold a national certification in school psychology, and I've obtained a master's degree in education with a concentration in Montessori studies, as well as an education specialist degree in school psychology. I'm a nationally certified Montessori coach and have received certification in anti-bias, anti-racism from the American Montessori Society as well. So during our time together today, I was going to say this morning, but I recognize we have people joining us from all over. So during our time together today, we'll begin by reviewing and dispelling a really common myth or misconception about Montessori education. And that's the idea that it stifles creativity and imagination. It always intrigues me to hear some of these myths and misconceptions, which couldn't be farther from the truth. So we'll start there, and then we'll explore the important distinction between fantasy and imagination and how each play a really important role in child development. Then we'll discuss the Montessori approach specifically to imagination and fantasy, both at the early childhood level, so we're talking about children under the age of 6, and then in the elementary classroom as well, so the ages of 6 to 12 years old. And we'll uncover how these stages of development guide the type and the timing of the creative engagement that children are exploring at those times. As I typically do for those of you who have attended my sessions, I love to start with a quote to give us some inspiration and to really ground what we're talking about today. So this is a quote from Maria Montessori. When speaking about imagination, she once said, "Imagination is inherent in the human mind. It is where our creativity stems from and is one of the ways we are able to understand the world around us." What she's highlighting here is that imagination is a natural and really essential part of the human mind. It's not something that's learned or acquired, but instead it's something that's deeply embedded within us. Imagination is really like this wellspring where our creativity stems from. It helps us think outside the box and to solve problems in new and exciting and creative ways. And it also plays a key role in how we make sense of the world around us. It allows us to visualize and understand things that we haven't directly experienced ourselves, that we don't have that first person perspective of. So that common misconception that I mentioned about Montessori pedagogy is that Montessori discourages the use of creativity, fantasy, and imagination. Maria Montessori did not discourage children from engaging in make believe play. However, during her observations with young children, so we're talking in that 3 to 6 year old range specifically right now, she saw that children preferred real over fantasy when given the choice. So it was almost like an experiment that she did. She talks about us as the prepared adults. That's what she refers to as the parent, the caregiver, the educator. As the prepared adults, we fulfill this role of scientist and we try different things and observe how the children respond. So she was fulfilling that role and she observed time after time that children under the age of 6 chose activities like cleaning, cooking, and what we in Montessori call practical life activities. So these activities that are just a normal part of everyday life, dressing themselves, learning how to button something, things that we might consider mundane, children chose those tasks over fantasy play. So we're going to dispel this myth a little bit more today as we discover the truth about the Montessori approach to fantasy and imagination and what it really looks like. Let's start by first distinguishing between fantasy and imagination. These are two really powerful faculties that shape our thoughts and creativity, but they are different. So, fantasy is the ability to imagine things that are impossible or highly improbable. So, it involves thinking about creatures or situations that don't exist in real life, things like dragons, fairies, monsters. This is where Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, all of those things come into play. Fantasy takes us into the world of the unseen, the non physical, things that are completely made up. And it's all about letting our minds wander to places that couldn't exist in reality. So there's no basis in reality. Imagination, on the other hand, is the ability to form new ideas, images, or concepts of things we haven't seen or experienced directly, but that do exist in real life. So, unlike fantasy, imagination doesn't always take us to a mythical place. It can be based on something we've observed or something that does happen in the real world, even if we haven't observed it or seen it with our own eyes. So I'm thinking about things like when children pretend, right? Pretend play, they pretend to take care of a baby doll, like a mom or a dad, or some other form of caregiver. When they pretend to be the person that delivers the mail or a police officer, right? That's imagination. It's things that they've observed and they're mimicking what they've seen or what they've heard about. And what they've seen could come from books, movies or TV shows, real world experiences. And it's through this imagination that children, and really all of us as human beings, create new possibilities. Whether it's through that role playing, like I was talking about, where you might pretend a block is a hairbrush, or coming up with innovative solutions to everyday problems, it's all about creativity and bringing new ideas to life in our minds. So, imagination really is that creativity aspect of problem solving as well. So then what does this look like in Montessori practice? In Montessori education, imagination plays a really central role in fostering creativity, problem solving, and a deeper understanding of the world for children. Maria Montessori believed that children are naturally imaginative. So she didn't try to discourage this, but she leaned into it because she believes that imagination helps children understand who they are and also helps them make sense of the world around them. So in the classroom, we create an environment that encourages imaginative thinking through hands-on learning, some open-ended materials, and opportunities for storytelling. Storytelling is a huge piece of Montessori pedagogy. Imagination also supports children in exploring abstract ideas. So, whether they're creating their own narratives, their own stories with friends, or maybe they're role playing different professions, they're building social and cognitive skills. And so then, therefore, Montessori sees imagination as a really essential part of a child's intellectual development, as well as their social emotional growth, and as a way to foster this lifelong love of learning, which is such a huge piece of Montessori. Fantasy, however, is often discouraged, specifically for children under the age of 6. And this is because before the age of 6, young children are building their understanding of the world around them. At this age, they have what Maria Montessori called an absorbent mind, which is a mind that's really eager to take in as much as possible from the real world. And so they rely on reality to help them construct concepts of how the world works. Unlike older children above the age of 6, these younger children under 6 aren't yet capable of abstract thought. And that's the foundation of fantasy. That's what we need to engage in fantasy play and fantasy creations in our mind, right? Is the ability to think abstractly. And so this means since children under the age of 6 aren't yet capable of that type of thought, that they find it really hard to distinguish between what's real and what's not. So, for example, if in a book that they're reading, there's a tree that talks and it moves from one place to another, they're likely to believe that can happen in the real world until they start around the age of 6 to be able to distinguish fantasy from real life. And again, based on Maria Montessori's observations, we know that children um, under the age of 6, and what she called the first plane of development, actually prefer reality to fantasy, right? It's going back to those observations that she shared. And this is because everything is new to children at this age. Children are fascinated by the natural world. They're fascinated by reality and day to day interactions, day to day life. There isn't a need to tell them about unicorns because they're so interested in horses or maybe another type of animal or plant or insect, right? At their age, the real world is providing them the inspiration and learning that their minds need. So we don't need to introduce fantasy. And it's in this way, by focusing on real experiences and tangible hands on learning, that Montessori education is able to help the young child before the age of 6 to build this really solid foundation of understanding. It respects their developmental stage and ensures that the information that they absorb is grounded in reality, which allows them to form accurate perceptions of the world and then prepares them for later years when fantasy can be introduced once they have the ability to think abstractly. Silvana Montanaro, who is one of the most recognized Montessori infant toddler teachers and also author of the book Understanding the Human Being, The Importance of the First 3 Years of Life, she highlights the importance of grounding young children in reality, like we were just talking about. She says, fantasy is very interesting to the older child, but only confusing to the very young. A rich foundation of stories about the real world is the best preparation for a creative imagination. We should check that books present reality, since at this age, children are trying to make sense of the environment and the life around them. There is nothing more extraordinary and interesting than our own daily life. Fantasy can come later, after reality has been experienced and absorbed. So you can see how Montanaro's insight here aligns with what we just discussed for the Montessori approach, emphasizing that connection between children and the real world during these very formative years. At this stage, children are in the process of constructing their understanding of life through that direct experience and sensory exploration. So, as educators, parents, caregivers, we need to be really mindful of selecting materials and selecting experiences that we offer to them that reflect the beauty, complexity, and wonder of the real world, because that's how we're going to offer children really the most extraordinary tool for their learning to set that foundation, which is reality itself. Maria Montessori did value children's natural inclination to explore and imagine, but she emphasized that recognizing their full potential really lays beyond just play and pretend. I want you to think for a moment. Imagine that you're starting a new job and you walk in, you're so excited on the first day about what you're going to do, what you're going to learn, how you're going to contribute meaningfully, right? All the things you'll do. And your boss looks at you and says, "Hi, good morning. Go play." How would you feel? You'd probably feel pretty discouraged, right? Like your contributions didn't really matter. Maybe that you didn't have anything meaningful to offer. That's often how children feel when we reduce all of their activity, everything that they do, to play. Instead, if we provide them realistic, rich, meaningful sensorial experiences, right, that are grounded in reality, we validate their capabilities and help them make sense of the world. And it's those experiences that lay the foundation for later authentic creative imagination. Interestingly, though, even Montessori professionals that are in the field, right? Classroom teachers, administrators, we often unintentionally perpetuate misunderstandings about imagination because we blur those lines between fantasy and imagination and what's permissible from a Montessori perspective. So we've kind of distinguished between the two. And often we, by talking about the children's work and how everything is grounded in reality, which is true. But we do allow children that freedom to explore creatively and to engage in imaginative play if it is student led, right? Child led, if they're the ones that are leading that play. So unintentionally, we sometimes feed into that misconception without meaning to. So then what is appropriate, right? We talked about things that we don't want to do, things we do want to do. What does it all come down to? Essentially, imagination is a uniquely human capability, right? We don't see this ability in other living beings. And imagination then is constructed by the child through their own efforts and experiences. It's not introduced as a way to teach a child to pretend or to imagine, but instead, that true joy in learning arises when a child is empowered and given the space and the time to make discoveries and connections for themselves. And this is the principle that really lies at the heart of the Montessori approach. Lessons that we present to children, the materials themselves, the works that are out on the shelf, they're presented as invitations, not instructions. We invite the child to a lesson. We invite them to explore a work that's out on the shelf, right? They're all displayed around the classroom that the children can explore at their own leisure, right? Based on what calls to them, what's interesting and engaging to them, because that's what's going to foster that love of learning. Children are given the freedom then to explore and build their imaginative intelligence in their own way and at their own pace based on what calls to them. So rather than dictating how or when children should use their imaginations, Dr. Maria Montessori advises us to quote unquote prepare an environment which will allow the child to exercise his efforts and aid the development of his imaginative intelligence. So, by carefully preparing these environments, right, we call the classroom the prepared environment, by offering these thoughtfully designed spaces and materials, we're naturally empowering children to construct their understanding of the world, right? And we're nurturing the development of that natural inborn creativity. So we're not causing it to come about or telling the children how to use it. We're just inviting them to develop it on their own. In fact, Maria Montessori reminds us of this profound role that imagination plays in human development, underscoring its importance, right? Dispelling that myth that Montessori doesn't encourage fantasy or imagination or creativity. She says, we often forget that the imagination is a force for the discovery of truth. So in Montessori education, imagination isn't viewed as an escape from reality, but instead as a tool for exploring and understanding the real world and real life more deeply. It's through the hands-on experiences, interactions with things in the real world, plants, animals. This is a beautiful picture here, right, of the child just captivated by this little bud that's sprouting. It's through these experiences where they're enamored and in awe that they develop the imaginative faculties in ways that lead to really meaningful discoveries and insights, and encourages that lifelong love of learning. So then let's take a look at breaking this down of what reality versus fantasy looks like at the different levels between early childhood, which in this specific instance, I'm talking about the 3 to 6 classroom in Montessori. We have mixed age classrooms. So our primary or early childhood classroom is 3, 4, 5, and 6 year olds. And then in just a moment, we'll take a look at elementary, which would be 6 to 12 year olds. So in the Montessori early childhood classroom for children ages 3 to 6, like we've talked about, activities are rooted in those real world experiences, helping children foster independence and also developing practical skills that they'll need for everyday life. For example, real life cooking. So instead of playing with a toy kitchen or wooden food, fruits, and vegetables, right? Children prepare real snacks and meals using age appropriate kitchen tools. So you can see here, this would be a work that would be set up on the shelf when the child was hungry, or it's even what we call a part of our grace and courtesy curriculum. The child would peel the banana. There would be an age appropriate knife that they could slice the banana, and they would put toothpicks in each of the slices and walk around with a tray to their classmates asking if they would like a slice of banana. It's a great way to foster that social emotional bond. They're getting that real world experience, right, of prepping a snack. It's just very beautiful. It's one of my favorite things to see in the classroom. Again, instead of pretend tea parties, right, children learn how to brew fresh tea and enjoy a tea party with real china with their classmates, or inviting parents and caregivers in for a tea party where they get that chance to not only uh, learn what it's like to brew fresh tea and drink fresh tea, but also they get that opportunity to practice grace and courtesy, to practice their manners. What are the expectations at a tea party? How do you sit? How do you hold the teacup, right? All of these really beautiful, rich, real world experiences. Again, another way that we introduce this is through authentic stories. So rather than introducing fictional tales like talking animals, children explore stories about real living beings. We introduce stories about real animals, people, and their lives so that they see this really beautiful tapestry of the diversity that exists on our planet and all the different living things and how we interact and all the wonderful things that we do. And this approach then empowers young children to connect with and learn how to navigate the real world, which builds their confidence and their capability, right? If we go back to what we were talking about, that situation with the boss, if we just introduce these pretend situations and these fantasy stories, right? Children feel a little discouraged, as if maybe we don't trust in them enough to allow them real experiences. And so by offering them these real experiences, we let them know we do trust in them. And that's what gives them that confidence and capability then to go on and continue to explore. So then, around the age of 6, Maria Montessori observed this significant shift in how children think. She identified this period of 6 to 12 as the second plane of development. During this stage, children are beginning to distinguish between reality and fantasy, and they're really driven to explore their imaginations. It's actually what we call a sensitive period for the elementary age child. And what that means is they have this heightened ability to learn new information, to gain new knowledge, or to master new skills related to this topic. So, imagination is one of them. They're just driven by this need to be imaginative. So this becomes a really powerful tool for learning, right? We can encourage children to think abstractly if we can find ways to incorporate their natural desire to explore their imaginations. So in the Montessori elementary classroom, instead of just teaching a history lesson in a typical way, right, lecture style, a teacher might present a history lesson and invite students to imagine themselves in that time or situation. Maybe they do a role play. Storytelling, like I was saying earlier, is a huge piece. So they take a historical time period or a historical situation and they tell a story about it, really drawing children in by speaking and calling to their imagination. Activities like writing these detailed creative stories give children opportunities to expand their imagination and prepare them to develop their own ideas and to better understand who they are and how they contribute to others. So, again, it's still that real world preparation. Um, Touching back on the storytelling aspect, I really want to highlight here that in what we call cosmic education in Montessori, so these are lessons like history, geography, science, botany, but then also in other areas, math and language as well, but particularly in cosmic education, storytelling is used as a really central, powerful tool to connect children to this idea of our universe, their role within it, how everything works. And that inspires this sense of wonder and imagination. Some of the most popular Montessori and infamous, I would even say, Montessori lessons are known as the Great Lessons. These are 5 stories that tell things like the story of the creation of the universe, the history of life on Earth, the history of writing, how language came to be, the story of math, how we introduced numbers as a human culture. And these stories invite children to use their imagination, right? It draws them into these large concepts that are rooted in reality, right? But just in really creative ways. And so, again, it not only engages their imagination, but helps them connect abstract ideas because they're learning how to abstract their thoughts to real world concepts. So, it's that shift from the first plane of development. All right. I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions because I feel like this it can be a pretty weighty topic. But before I open it up, I just want to make sure I say thank you so much for being here today. I hope that you learned something about Montessori and the approach to creativity, imagination, and fantasy. My contact information is here. I'll leave it up for just a moment if you have any questions that we don't get to today. You can always email me. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I would also love to have you all check out my website as well as my social media accounts. It's at Montessori.matters. I share lots of Montessori and other education, parenting related content that hopefully you'll find helpful.